6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, I'm Rob. Welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm joined today by Finn. Hello, Finn.
Hi, Rob.
Today we're talking about something we have some expertise in or knowledge about. That's teaching English.
Indeed, that's right, Rob. We work on the BBC's Learning English website, hopefully giving people around the world a helping hand in learning a language that isn't the one they normally use.
Well, hopefully we're about to make that learning journey a bit easier as we launch a brand new online course.
Yes.
But how long does it take someone to become a fluent speaker of English?
Well, it's a good question, Rob, and one we'll try to answer today. We'll also be discussing some general ways to make learning English easier and explaining some learning-related vocabulary along the way. So, let's get started, Rob.
Okay, well, hold your horses, Finn.
Okay.
Not so fast. I have a question to ask you first. According to the last UK census taken in 2011, what percentage of the British population speaks a first language that's not English? Is it A, 1.7%, B, 7.7%, or C, 14.7%?
That's an interesting one. My first guess is C, 14.7%.
Well, we'll find out if you're right or wrong later on. So now we can discuss how learning English is getting easier. Of course, there are a huge number of publications, books, leaflets and magazines that can help teach you. But there are those people who say that you can't beat the real thing, a teacher. Someone who can explain a language to you face to face.
Indeed, but that comes at a cost and isn't always practical. You might not have a school nearby. That's why in the 21st century, online seems to be the main method of learning. Technology is allowing the English language to come to you.
That's true. And that's why we've launched a brand new English course that's available on a computer, tablet or mobile phone. It's aimed at intermediate learners and charts a pathway through the various aspects of the language.
And we hope that by committing around 15 minutes a day to using it, a learner will see a real improvement in their English knowledge and skill. But as well as using resources available online, how else can someone help themselves to get a better grasp, that's a better understanding, of English?
Well, if someone wants to become a confident speaker of English, trainer Richard Hallows has some tips. Have a listen and see if you can hear what are the two main aspects of English that you need.
Most importantly, you've got to have a good range of vocabulary and grammar. You need to know lots of words. The more words you know, the better, obviously. And similarly with grammar, the more grammar you have, the better you can explain yourself. We also need to think about pronunciation. Learners of English often worry about speaking like a native speaker. It's not necessary to have a native accent.
OK, so Richard says you need a good range or a wide variety of vocabulary and grammar. The more words you know, the more you can say. And the more grammar you know, the better you can say it.
Or even write it.
True.
One other tip is don't try to sound like a native, so someone who speaks English as a first language. Well, all these are things that we aim to cover in our new course.
Our new course might be a big help to you if you need English for your work, or if you're studying in English, or if you're planning to visit or even live in the UK. In fact, the British government expects immigrants to reach ESOL Entry 3 or B1 level before they can be granted citizenship. It's equivalent to being able to hold a reasonably confident basic conversation.
Well, in the UK, it's estimated that you need around 360 hours of study to get to that stage from not knowing any English at all. But this depends on a number of factors such as motivation, how much you want to learn.
And age can be a factor too. Some experts say it's common for children under the age of 11 to be very immersed and be fluent in English in about 6 months. But why should someone choose to learn English? This is something we've been asking you on our Facebook page.
Osama says, It's like my passport. You need it wherever you go.
Very good. Suzuki says it's an international communication tool.
And Ha thinks it's the key to getting a good job with a high salary.
Denise says it's the language that opens doors overseas. Wow. Well, thanks for all your messages.
But now, Rob, I need to know if I got today's question right.
Yes, I asked you, according to the last UK census taken in 2011, what percentage of the British population speaks a first language that's not English?
I said 14.7%.
I think that was a wild guess, Finn,
A very
because
crazy guess.
You were wrong. The census found 7.7% of people in the UK that have a first language that's not English. That's 4.2 million people. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to check our new website at bbclearningenglish.com. Happy learning.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Sam.
And I'm Roy.
Nowadays, many people use online dating apps to find love and romance. This involves writing a dating profile, a short description of yourself, which you hope makes you appear attractive to other people looking for love online.
Online dating started with the internet, but the idea is not new. In the days before the internet, people put dating adverts in newspapers. Because they paid a price per word, people described themselves in as few words as possible, using abbreviations like GSOH, which meant a good sense of humour. Eventually, GSOH became part of everyday English.
Amazingly, the same thing is now happening in the world of online dating. In this programme, we'll be learning some of the newly invented words and phrases being used by people who are looking for love on the internet.
Every year, thousands of romantic relationships start through online dating apps. But, as always with information found on the internet, there's a danger that someone's dating profile doesn't tell the whole truth.
That's right, Roy. So my question is this. According to research, what do men tend to lie about in their dating profile? Is it A, their hair, B, their height, or C, their age?
Well, most people want to appear younger, so I'll say it's C, their age.
We'll find out if that's the correct answer later. The person behind the online dating research I mentioned was Dr. Nicola Fox Hamilton. She describes herself as a cyber psychologist and has interviewed both men and women about what they hide from potential online dating partners. Listen as she tells BBC Radio 4's Word of Mouth what she discovered from her interviews.
If you're very deceptive, so if you have no friends and you never go to the pub and you said in your profile that your most fun thing to do is hanging out with your friends on a Saturday night, then that becomes a problem because then you've been very deceptive. If you occasionally do it and you made it sound a bit more like you do it all the time, that's more exaggeration. A lot of people do that, where they exaggerate things about themselves to make them seem more attractive, but they're walking a fine line and trying to balance between being attractive and not completely disappointing.
People often exaggerate things about themselves to seem more attractive online. For example, that they love hanging out or spending time with friends. Nicola also says there's a difference between exaggerating and being deceptive, deliberately lying and making someone believe things that are not true.
Nicola says deceptive daters are walking a fine or thin line. They're finding a balance between two opposing attitudes or ideas.
Online dating has also created new vocabulary of its own. Here's Nicola Fox Hamilton again explaining the meaning of two new words, catfishing and woke fishing, to BBC Radio 4's Word of Mouth.
Woke fishing is a version of catfishing, and catfishing is where someone creates a profile that isn't them at all. So a complex false identity, usually with the purpose of looking for or pretending to get involved in love or romance. Woke fishing is where the person is generally who they say they are, but they say that they're much more liberal in their values and political attitudes than they actually are.
Catfishing is when someone tries to be more attractive by creating a false profile and pretending to be someone else on social media.
Related to this is the term woke phishing. Here, someone asks about your political and social opinions and pretends to share them in order to get closer to you. They may pretend to have more liberal or progressive attitudes than they really do.
Looking for love is never easy. The internet has helped thousands find romance and created some interesting new vocabulary, but there are dangers and disappointments too.
Speaking of which, it's time to reveal the answer to your question, Sam. You asked what men tend to lie about in their dating profiles. I guessed it was their age.
You were wrong. According to research by Dr. Fox Hamilton, men tend to lie about their height and women about their weight. Okay, let's recap the new vocabulary we've learnt in this program about the language of online romance, starting with dating profile, a brief written description of yourself, which you hope will attract a partner.
Being deceptive means lying so people believe something that is not true.
Hanging out is an informal way to say spending time with someone, usually friends.
The phrase walking a fine line means finding a balance between two opposing ideas or attitudes, or between two opposing sides so as not to annoy either side.
And finally, we learnt two newly invented expressions. Catfishing means trying to appear more attractive by pretending to be someone else on social media.
And woke phishing is when someone pretends to share the same liberal opinions as the person they are attracted to. Once again, our 6 minutes are up. Good luck if you are looking for love online. And remember, there's probably someone out there interested in the real you. Bye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm Alice.
And I'm Neil.
Could you lend me some dosh, Neil?
Sure, how much do you need?
A couple of smackers?
You're sounding a bit strange today, Alice.
Yes, I know, Neil. Slang, or informal language used by a particular group, is the subject of today's show. And I was just demonstrating a couple of slang words that mean money. Dosh is a general term for money, and a smacker is a British pound or US dollar.
OK, so Cockney rhyming slang is a type of slang. It's a coded language invented in the 19th century by Cockneys, so they could speak in front of the police without being understood. And still on the subject of money, I have a question for you, Alice.
Oh, OK.
What's Cockney rhyming slang for money? Is it A, bread, B, honey, or C, dough?
I think it's A, bread. I bet you didn't know, Neil, that I'm a Cockney.
Oh, don't Adam and Eve it, Alice. That's a pork pie.
Adam and Eve means believe, and pork pie means lie. Actually, you're right. I'm not a Cockney.
To be considered a Cockney, you need to be born within hearing distance of the bells of St Mary Le Bow Church in what is now the City of London.
Indeed. Now, slang, as we've said, is colloquial or informal language, and it's characteristic of specific social groups. We usually use it in informal conversation rather than in writing or more formal situations like a job interview.
We change the way we speak so that what we say is appropriate for a particular situation. So you surprised me earlier, Alice, by talking about dosh and smackers because it didn't seem appropriate for presenting the show.
Slang use is often frowned upon or disapproved of. Let's listen to Jonathan Green, a lexicographer of slang, talking about who uses slang and how this has changed. Here he is on the Radio 4 programme Word of Mouth.
Slang does have a bad reputation, and I would say this comes from its earliest collection, which was of criminal slang in the 1500s, in the 16th century, and it was associated with bad people. And inevitably that has lingered. But now, in the last 40, 50 years, it's changed. The definitions tend to stress different and jocular, funny, humorous, inventive, that kind of thing.
So we have records of 16th century slang in collections or dictionaries. words used by criminals as a code so they could talk without being understood. And this bad reputation has lingered or been slow to disappear.
But for the last 50 years, we've been using slang to be funny and creative, as well as to show belonging to a particular group. And apparently we're very creative when talking about drinking and being drunk. The slang word booze, meaning alcohol, comes from the 13th century Dutch word boozen.
And there are hundreds of slang expressions to talk about drink and being drunk. On the sauce, in your cups, half-cut, hammered, squiffy, tipsy, wasted, legless, and many, many more that are far too rude to mention in this programme.
Yes. So while these terms might not be strictly acceptable or appropriate in formal contexts, they aren't offensive. They are often amusing and help people bond in social groups.
By contrast, swear words or profanity means rude language that offends or upsets people. And I'm not going to give any examples because that would be inappropriate and impolite, Alice.
OK, let's listen now to Jonathan Green and presenter Michael Rosen talking about jargon, another type of in-group language.
Jargon, what I would call is small o occupational, small p professional slang. It's closed off environment. You get legal jargon, you get naval jargon. I've been reading Patrick O'Brien recently, and that's awash with futtock plates and fiddying the deck.
This is Radio 4, Jonathan. Be careful.
Jonathan Green in another segment of the BBC Radio 4 programme Word of Mouth. So he says jargon is occupational and professional, meaning people speak it at work, for example, lawyers and sailors. A futtock plate is, I believe, an iron plate attached to the top of a ship's mast, but I don't know much about this subject.
That's the idea, though. Jargon is the technical language belonging to a specific group. And to outsiders, this jargon is often hard to understand.
Yes, and here in the studio I can use all the radio jargon that I like. Look at my faders here, Alice, going down and up and up and up, just testing our levels.
Come on, leave the fader alone. It controls the level of sound on a studio deck. Now, it's time for the answer to today's quiz question, Neil.
I asked you, what's Cockney rhyming slang for money? Is it A, bread, B, honey, or C, dough?
And I said A, bread.
And you were right, Alice. Cockney rhyming slang uses just the first word of a phrase that rhymes with the word we're trying to disguise. So money becomes bread and honey, but we just say bread.
OK, so let's recap on the words we've learnt today. They are slang, dosh, smacker, Cockney rhyming slang, colloquial, frowned upon, lingered, booze, swear, profanity, jargon.
Well, that's the end of today's 6 Minute English. Please join us again soon.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm Alice.
And I'm Neil.
So, Neil, you texted me earlier and didn't put a full stop at the end.
You're right. I never use full stops in text. They're much too stuffy or formal. Texting is like conversation. You don't need lots of punctuation.
Well, punctuation is the subject of today's show. And I know I'm a bit of a stickler about this, but I think you're letting the standards of written English language slip.
A stickler is someone who insists on a certain way of doing a particular thing. Surely you aren't such a stickler for punctuation rules that you want to stop the evolution of English, Alice?
No, of course not. But I am a stickler when people don't follow the rules of punctuation, because this makes written text ambiguous or difficult to understand.
Ambiguous means when something has two or more meanings. Can you give me some examples of punctuation making text easier to understand?
All right then, here you are. Let's eat grandma.
Ugh. It brings to mind the children's story Little Red Riding Hood about a girl, her grandmother, and a hungry wolf. Is that the wolf talking to another wolf friend of his?
No, it's the girl, Red Riding Hood, talking to her grandmother. And with a well-placed comma, it becomes, let's eat, grandma. Without proper punctuation, the sentence is ambiguous. Now, before we look at more reasons why punctuation is important, let's have today's quiz question.
OK, what is another word for the keyboard sign that represents a paragraph? Is it A, pilcrow, B, bodkin, or C, piker?
I'll say C, piker.
Well, we will find out later in the show if you got that right or wrong.
Moving on now. Punctuation was invented by the ancient Greeks. They used a series of dots to indicate different lengths of pauses. A short unit of text was a comma, a longer unit was a colon, and a complete sentence was a periodos. We used these terms to name our punctuation marks, although they actually refer to the clauses, not to the dots themselves.
So early punctuation wasn't really about grammar then?
No, it was about public speaking. The different dots indicated different lengths of pauses, short, medium and long. These pauses broke up the text, so it was easier to read and therefore easier to understand.
OK, let's hear from the punctuation expert Keith Houston, who is author of Shady Characters, Ampersands, Interrobangs and Other Typographical Curiosities. Here he's talking on BBC Radio 4's Word of Mouth.
Punctuation started off being all about rhetoric, about speech, but we started to assign rules. I think around about the 8th century or so, we started to associate the marks, not just with pauses, but with the actual grammatical units that were used to punctuate. So a comma wasn't just a dot that meant pause for this length of time. It now actually marked out a clause, it marked out a sort of consistent logical bit of writing.
So, rhetoric, or the art of persuasive speaking, was very important to the Greeks and to the Romans. And to be persuasive, you need to be understood. And these little punctuation marks help the speaker to deliver their text more effectively.
Later on, these marks were given grammatical functions. The comma marks out a clause or grammatical unit containing a subject and a verb, as well as telling the reader to pause briefly.
Are you beginning to see why being sloppy or careless with punctuation isn't a good thing, Neil?
Yes, I am. Though recent research into texting and punctuation suggests that people consider messages ending in full stops to be less sincere than ones without.
Really? Well, now might be a good time to hear about how it can be hard to make writing unambiguous. We can misinterpret the written word even with punctuation to guide us. Here's Keith Houston again talking to Michael Rosen, presenter of Word of Mouth.
Quite often I notice on Twitter and places like that, people misunderstand irony. Because we only have text in front of us, not intonation. So do we need an irony punctuation? Hello, I'm being ironic now. Do we need that?
You might say that emoticons are the best way to go about that. A little winking emoticon, semicolon, dash, closing parenthesis.
Yes. Of course, they've invented all these using the punctuation that we have on the keyboard.
Irony means using words to mean something that is the opposite of its literal or most usual meaning. But when we're online using email or Twitter, you don't hear the words, and that's why it can be hard to know what feelings the writer intended.
That's right. When we use emoticons, facial expressions made out of keyboard characters, we can signpost the feelings we intend.
Now, Alice, remember I asked you, what is another word for the keyboard sign that represents a paragraph? Is it A, pilcrow, B, bodkin, or C, piker?
Yes, I said piker.
And you were wrong, I'm afraid.
Oh.
The right answer is pilcrow, which comes from the Greek word paragraphos. The earliest reference of the modern pilcrow is from 1440 with the Middle English word pilecraft.
Oh dear. Sad face. I hate it when I get the quiz question wrong. Now, can we hear the words we learnt today?
Yes, they are stuffy, stickler, rhetoric, clause, sloppy, irony, literal, emoticons.
Well, that's the end of today's 6-Minute English. Please join us again soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.
6-Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello and welcome to 6-Minute English. I'm Finn.
And I'm Neil. Hello. Today we're talking about Shakespeare.
Oh yes, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind...
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Finn. But what does that famous Shakespeare line actually mean, Finn?
Yeah, well, it's quite hard to explain, actually. The English in Shakespeare's work is quite difficult.
Well, a Shakespeare festival in Oregon in the United States wants to change all of that. They want to pay writers, they want to commission what they call translations of Shakespeare's plays. Now, we usually use the word translation, of course, to talk about changing words and sentences from one language to another. But these writers have been commissioned to translate Shakespearean English into plain English.
So Shakespeare in easy, plain English. You know, I'm not sure I really like that idea.
Well, you're not the only one, Finn. We will talk about that in a moment, but first, as usual, we have our quiz question, and it's about Shakespeare and translation. What was the first language that Shakespeare's plays were translated into? Was it A, French, B, German, or C, Portuguese? What do you think?
You know, I really have no idea on this one. I'm going to say B, German.
We'll see if you're right at the end of the programme. But now we're going to hear from two Shakespeare experts speaking to the BBC. First, Andrew Dickinson. He's the author of Worlds Elsewhere, Journeys Around Shakespeare's Globe.
In his travels around the world, around the globe, did he find many translations of Shakespeare?
Someone's translated Hamlet into Klingon. He exists in all of these different places in all of these different forms. And I suppose that what really struck me when I was working on my book and travelling around the world talking to people about Shakespeare is that he's so multifarious. He exists in all of these places, and it feels sometimes that we in the English-speaking world are only just catching up with this.
Shakespeare expert Andrew Dickinson, who has travelled the world for his new book and knows about many translations, even one from out of this world.
Yes, he says someone has even translated Hamlet into Klingon. Now, that's the language spoken by aliens in Star Trek, which is, of course, a science fiction TV series. It's not a real language.
Oh, let's get back to the real world, Neil. Andrew Dickinson says that what really impressed him, what really struck him while working on his new book and travelling around the world talking about Shakespeare is that Shakespeare is so multifarious. Multifarious, that's quite a difficult word.
Yes, it is. Well, in plain English, it means that there are many different types. There are many different translations, many different kinds of Shakespeare.
He's multifarious.
Finn, we're using plain English in this programme, like the people in Oregon who want to translate Shakespeare into plain English. That will make his plays easier to understand.
And that's a good thing. But there has also been strong criticism about this from academics who study Shakespeare, as well as from people on social media, on Facebook and Twitter. They think it's a bad idea.
Our next Shakespeare expert is Greg Doran. He's the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He's done productions outside Britain. Where did he do a production of the Shakespeare play Merchant of Venice? Here he's talking about the difficulty of translation.
I think the difficulty with a translation is that it simply translates the sense, and there's a lot more going on in the language of Shakespeare's plays. I remember once doing a production of Merchant of Venice in Japan, and I was asked, we were having a new translation done, and I was asked if I wanted the translation for meaning, for pace, or for poetry. And that's the difficulty. You've got to find all three somehow together.
Greg Doran, artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was doing a Shakespeare production in Japan. He says that the difficulty with translation is that it only translates the sense. It's only the general meaning. But he says that there's more than that.
Yes, they were having a translation done, and he was asked if he wanted the translation for meaning or for pace. Now, that's about the speed of the lines in the play. Or was the poetry of the words important?
And his answer was that you've got to find all three somehow together. It's not just one thing.
He says that there's a lot going on. There's a lot happening in the language of Shakespeare's plays.
And so a simple translation of the words into plain English isn't really Shakespeare. And I think it's time to answer our quiz question.
Yes, if you remember, it's about translations of Shakespeare. What was the first language that Shakespeare's plays were translated into? Was it A, French, B, German, C, Portuguese?
I said B, German, which I'll admit was a guess.
And that is the right answer.
Fantastic.
Apparently, Shakespeare's plays were translated into German as early as the first decade of the 17th century. And that's all for now. Please do join us again for 6 Minute English.
To be or not to be?
Yes, okay, thanks, Finn.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.